In our module introduction, we talked about how you create leverage as a great PM by aligning your work to multiple dimensions of your product strategy. We also discussed how most PMs have a basic understanding of their product strategy, but lack the next layer of depth. They need this additional depth of understanding because it helps them create leverage in two ways: knowing what feature work to modify or avoid, and knowing what feature work to heavily invest in. In this lesson, we'll talk about how to get to that deep level of understanding for the first dimension of product strategy, target audience. We start with this dimension because it directly impacts the rest of the product strategy. In other words, changing your target audience directly will change the problem set you can solve for, which then will change the range of value propositions you can offer. These three early changes then affect the remaining dimensions of strategy, making them fundamental to deeply understand first. To illustrate this, let's examine how Slack's product strategy would completely change if they focused on online communities instead of workplace collaboration. Let's first go through Slack's current product strategy given their workplace collaboration focus, and then dive into how each strategic dimension would change if they shifted to online communities. First, Slack's current problem they solve in workplace collaboration is facilitating quick decisions and reducing cost of communication. They do this via their value proposition, saving time by tearing down communication barriers. They differentiate by finding novel and innovative ways to create worker productivity, especially compared to traditional communication paradigms like email. Their dominant acquisition strategy is viral word-of-mouth signups, powered by referrals from existing users, but they also have a dedicated sales team. As a freemium company, they have a free plan that is supplemented by several tiers of premium paid plans. They allow users to build a habit on the product and then create an incentive to upgrade after the usage habit is established by limiting the free plan message history to 10,000 messages. Now let's explore how changing the target audience completely shifts this product strategy. If Slack focused on serving online communities instead, they'd have a completely different problem to solve. Online communities tend to need strong community moderation capabilities to keep them manageable, and powerful community discovery capabilities to power user engagement. Since the problem solved and value proposition are so closely tied to each other, this then means Slack's value proposition would pivot to focus on automating the painful parts of community moderation and discovery. Changing the problem being solved also affects the competitors Slack would need to differentiate against, and how they do so. Instead of being great at creating productivity, they'd focus on being great at community management and growth.
Additionally, since online communities generally have lower ability and willingness to pay than companies, Slack would not be able to rely on a sales team-powered acquisition strategy. They have to power themselves purely on word of mouth.
Finally, this difference in willingness to pay also affects their monetization strategy. Since they might get far too low a premium to free user ratio to sustain themselves, they might have to pivot to something like an ads-based model instead. In conclusion, changing the target audience heavily affects the other dimensions of your product strategy. Accordingly, it's critical that you have a deep understanding of who exactly your target audience is. PMs sometimes have a surface-level understanding of target audience and consider it to be their total addressable audience, the broad base of people the company aspires to eventually serve. For example, let's look at LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Sales Navigator is a premium LinkedIn subscription for salespeople built to help them find and engage with new prospects and customers. The surface-level understanding of Sales Navigator's target audience is that it encompasses all salespeople. However, the problem with such a broad, surface-level audience definition is that you end up building an unfocused product. When you try to build for too general an audience, you spread your resources too thin and end up not deeply solving any specific audience's needs. This then leads to weak product-market fit, which then ultimately results in low user retention and satisfaction. For example, let's assume you were a PM at LinkedIn Sales Navigator who had a surface-level understanding of the target audience. You try to build for the general audience of all salespeople. However, imagine how difficult it would be to create a deep solution for all salespeople. Different types of salespeople can have very different priorities. Account executives, also known as hunters, focus on hunting down new contracts. Account managers, also known as farmers, focus on maintaining and expanding existing contracts. They have completely unique challenges and needs. If you split your time trying to satisfy both, you likely would come up with an unfocused product that doesn't solve either segment's needs well. Deep understanding of your target audience requires that you understand the narrowest relevant set of users for your product. Defining your audience tightly is key because it allows you to develop a more tailored product and market towards your best customers who resonate most strongly with the problems you're solving and are thus the most likely to become your product's evangelists. For example, in LinkedIn Sales Navigator's initial product, they recognized that they were not serving salespeople in general. Rather, they were best poised to serve hunters who did high-value B2B deals in tech and/or finance. Armed with this understanding, they focused on developing specifically for this highly narrow audience.
They deprioritized farmer account management features, and instead they prioritized hunter account executive features.
This includes features like TeamLink, which allowed hunters to extend their network of potential warm connections into a company. This resulted in Sales Navigator finding a strong customer foothold, giving them a strong retaining user base of hunters to grow with. To advance your understanding from surface to deep, you have to filter down from your general audience into your narrowest target audience. We call this method the bullseye approach because you can visualize each narrowing down of your audience as a concentric ring, ultimately creating a bullseye type of visual. The bullseye approach to target audience definition solves the problem of having too loose an audience definition by starting with the most general audience possible first, and then narrowing it down until you've gotten to requisite depth. In other words, until you've gotten to an audience where you have strong product market fit. Indicators of PMF vary by company, but some common indications are high retention, a meaningfully positive NPS score, and/or significant organic traffic. The bullseye approach has 3 high-level steps: defining your total addressable audience, narrowing your audience based on segments you seem logically poised to better serve, and confirming your target audience using live data. This approach is captured on the product strategy map under target audience so that you have an actionable template to fill out for yourself. We strongly encourage you to fill these in during the content walkthroughs to better solidify and apply your knowledge. Documenting your process through the template also gives you an easily shareable deliverable, which you can use to align your team or leadership later on. To assist in your understanding, we also provide examples of how 2 companies would apply the template: LinkedIn Sales Navigator and Substack. Substack is an online publishing platform for subscription newsletters. It provides a solution for writers who want to get paid for writing by allowing readers to pay for regular subscriptions. Now let's go back to how the bullseye approach works. First, start off by defining your broadest audience, the aspirational circle of who you want to serve over time. This is anyone you could serve or who could get value from your product. This has parallels to your total addressable market, a number that's almost always findable in your investor or board decks since it is a key financial metric. The key difference is that instead of looking for the addressable market dollar size, you're more focused on figuring out who your addressable audience consists of. For example, at LinkedIn Sales Navigator, the broad audience was all sales professionals. At Substack, the broad audience was all writers, because their product could fundamentally serve any person who wanted a publishing platform. Then narrow down your audience. Consider which audience segments your product may be particularly well suited to serve. These make up your concentric rings of the bullseye. Narrowing your audience is typically done by filtering on several common attributes. Use case, the specific use case for which they derive value from your product or service. Role, the role or department in which they fall within the organization adopting your solution. Demographics, typical demographic attributes like age, gender, race, income level, education level, marital status, and more. Firmographics, specific attributes of the company that you are targeting, including industry, employee size, department size, business model, and more. Psychographics, specific psychographic attributes of potential customers, including things like willingness to try new solutions, personality characteristics, personal goals, and more. This narrowing step might involve several layers of narrowing. For example, at LinkedIn, they narrowed down their audience first to B2B, then to B2B sales professionals that manage more than 100K ACV contracts, and finally to B2B account executives that hunt for more than 100K ACV contracts. Their logic was that their product's main value was providing social selling information, which would have the highest willingness to pay from companies that did high-value deals. Then, within the sales audience, account executives would receive the most value, since key LinkedIn Sales Navigator benefits, like a way to contact the user and pre-sales intelligence, were more relevant to them than to account managers. At Substack, they narrowed down their audience first to writers who wanted to get paid, because their product was designed around monetizing written content. They knew they could design Substack's user experience to encourage readers to pay and subscribe, making it the most attractive platform for writers who specifically wanted to get paid for writing. They then narrowed it down further to writers who wanted to be paid and who publish on a regular basis, because their product was designed to support subscription-based writing. So, to recap, in step 2 of the bullseye approach, you're narrowing down your audience based on your hypothesis of who your product is best set up to serve. In the final step of the bullseye approach, you'll refine the audience hypothesis by looking at actual data on what customer segments seem to be most attractive to you. In order to determine what customer segments are most attractive, you might consider several attributes. These attributes are segment size. What is the total addressable market size for this segment? Is this segment large enough to enable you to build a meaningful business against it? Resonance with value proposition. How well does the existing value proposition resonate with this audience? Willingness to pay. Can you effectively monetize against this audience based on evidence of their willingness to pay, available budget, derived value, etc.? Strongest delivered value. Which customer segment is the most engaged and the happiest with your solution? NPS and retention are good proxies of this. Channel strategy. Can you effectively and affordably reach this target customer segment via your available marketing channels? Strategic fit. Does this audience fit the overall strategic vision for the company, especially in light of where you ultimately want to expand with future products and services? When you evaluate your live customer data to find which segments are most attractive, you'll commonly end up with one of two outcomes. 1. You realize your target audience is even narrower than your original hypothesis. 2. You realize your target audience is different from what you thought. In some cases, the target audience is refined. For example, LinkedIn Sales Navigator discovered that tech and finance account executives engaged particularly well after launch due to the fact that LinkedIn overall had a high density of tech and finance members. These sales professionals got more value out of the product because they had more prospects already on there. This signaled to the Sales Navigator team to refine their target audience to B2B hunters with more than 100K ACV deal size in tech/finance. Substack also had a refined target audience in this step. They found that professional journalists benefited the most from Substack's offerings. Since they were already professionally writing, they needed to find a platform that could financially support them, which wasn't the case for hobbyists who only occasionally wrote articles. In other cases, the target audience is pivoted. For example, consider NoteJoy. NoteJoy is a collaborative notes app for teams and individuals. It differentiates itself primarily on the simplicity of the user experience, being highly intuitive to use. When narrowing down their target audience, NoteJoy originally thought they would best serve small tech companies. These smaller companies likely would not have a formal note software already in place, and their tech savviness would make them more likely to adopt something new. However, NoteJoy found that its most engaged users were actually non-tech, small and medium-sized businesses like law firms and agencies because they had the least tech savviness. As a result, NoteJoy's intuitiveness and speed was highly appealing to them. In contrast, users in tech didn't value the intuitiveness as highly as they did powerful features. Additionally, an important nuance to note in the bullseye process is that refining your target audience does not necessarily mean you are turning people away. For example, Substack isn't actively turning away hobbyist writers or writers who don't care about getting paid. They're still perfectly happy to have them sign up as writers on the platform. Rather, target audience means that you actively prioritize developing for a certain subgroup of your users for whom your product resonates most, and deprioritize feature development for those outside their user group. So, for example, Substack would prioritize feature requests from professional journalists over feature requests that specifically serve hobbyist writers. So, to summarize, in this lesson we covered how to develop a deep understanding of your target audience. Using the bullseye approach, you went from the typical high-level understanding of your general audience to deep understanding of your narrowest target audience. When you connect this deep understanding to your product work, you'll develop features and products that better resonate with your core users, leading to higher retention and user satisfaction. Without this deep understanding, you run the risk of developing less focused products, leading to poorer product outcomes. In the next lesson, we'll cover how to develop a deep understanding of the problem you're solving.